Like that, yeah?
Yeah, okay then. Well, it's 10 o'clock, so if you could start the record. Oh, yes, she has, right, okay. I would like to welcome everybody to this meeting of the Planning Department of Planning Committee of Neath Talbot Council. 10 o'clock on Tuesday, the 2nd of February 2021. This meeting is via Teams remotely because of the COVID. And I would remind you of the protocol that has been previously issued to members regarding this type of meeting. To members of the public, welcome. To members of the press, welcome. To registered speakers, welcome. If you are here just to witness the meeting, you are not allowed to take part in any way. So it's nice that you're showing this interest in it, but you can't ask questions or take part in the chat function. If you're a registered speaker, welcome. We will go through that in a moment. And if you could at all times keep your phones on silent and mute your microphones unless you're called on to speak. It just helps with the feedback because there are so many people in this meeting. I would be grateful if you could all adhere to that. Okay, so what we need to do is have a roll call. So Tammy, could you please take the roll call of the meeting, please?
Yes, certainly, Chair. Thank you very much. Just to reiterate what you have said, Chair, I will not be calling out the names of the participants in the attendees in the public gallery because they're not participating in the meeting.
Okay.
So this is a roll call for participants of today's meeting.
Okay.
Could I ask members of the public gallery, please, to turn off your cameras and remain on mute, please? Thank you. So I'll start with yourself, Chair, Councillor Suzanne Paterson.
Present.
Thank you. Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy.
Present.
Councillors Chris Jones.
Present.
Dennis Keogh.
Present.
Rydian Maisen.
Present, Tommy.
Thank you. Ros Davis. Not present. Okay. Scott Bamsey. Also not present. Steve Hunt.
I'm here, Tommy.
Thank you. Alwyn Woolcock.
Present, Chair.
Mark Prothero.
Present, thanks, Tommy.
Thank you. Suzanne Renkers.
Present.
Thank you. And Councillor Chris Williams, who is also the local member for the application today.
Present, Chair.
Thank you. We're expecting local member Councillor Joe Hale, who will hopefully join us when her technical difficulties are resolved. We have planning officers Steve Ball.
Yes, good morning, everybody.
Good morning. And Stephen Jenkins.
Good morning.
Good morning. Environmental health officers Gareth Liley. No. Just Leah Morgan?
Yes, present. Morning.
Thank you, Leah. Good morning. Highways Officer Justin Griffiths.
I'm present, Tammy. Thank you.
Thank you. Highway Development Engineer Delith Thomas.
Present. Good morning.
Thank you. Legal Officers Mike Shaw.
Present, Tammy. Thank you.
Thank you. And Rebecca McGregor.
Good morning. Present.
Thank you. Myself, Tammy Davis. I'm a Democratic Services Officer. Then we have present for item P2019/5304 Aldi Neath Abbey, Esther Thomas, who's our registered speaker.
I'm here.
Thank you. And the applicant for the application, Rob Jones, Aldi's Regional Property Director.
Present, thank you.
Thank you. Representing Wales Online, we have Hannah Neary.
Hiya. Thanks, Tammy.
Thank you. And I believe that covers everybody who is participating in the meeting. If I've missed anyone, let me know.
No, that's fine, Tammy. And can you please formally confirm that we are quorate for this meeting?
Yes, you are, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lovely. Okay. So having done that, I'll just run through before I go to the meeting proper, part one, the order in which I would like to do this today, as normal, I will come to registered speakers first, and then local members, and then members of the public. And I would just like you all to adhere to all I had said earlier. Okay, then, part one of the meeting, item 1 is declarations of interest. I think, Tammy, we normally go through the members of the committee just to make sure that there is no declarations of interest formally. So if you could do that for me, please.
Certainly, Chair. Councillor Suzanne Paterson, do you have any declarations?
No, I do not.
Okay. Councillor Sean Percy.
No.
Councillor Sean Percy, any declarations of interest?
I'm in here, but I can't unmute or anything.
You have, we just all heard you.
Yes, that's Councillor Hale, is it?
Yeah,
That's lovely. Okay.
Councillor Percy, no interest to declare,
Thank you, Councillor Percy. Following councillors, do you have any declarations, please? Chris Jones.
No, Tammy.
Dennis Keogh.
None, Tammy.
Rydian Maisen.
No interest to declare, Tammy.
Thank you. Steve Hunt.
I have no interest to declare, Tammy.
Thank you. Arwyn Woolcock.
Chair, I do know the person that's going to be speaking this morning, the public speaker, but it's just a case that I know she's a lady from this particular area originally, but I don't think I need to declare that.
No need for that, Councillor Wilcock. Thank you for mentioning it.
Thank you. Mark Prothero, any declarations?
Thanks, Tammy. No declarations to declare.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkers.
No declarations.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Chris Williams.
I have, Chair. I would like to declare a personal interest as I am an employee of Tesco Stores Limited.
Right.
I thank you, Chair. I shall send you a form following the meeting for you to complete.
Just to confirm, Mike Shaw, that doesn't bar him from participating and voting in this meeting.
Hey, Jane,
No,
I can't see anybody, and I can't.
Chair, I'm just going to mute Councillor Hale.
Yes, please. Yeah. Sorry, people, we're having a few.
Sorry, everyone.
Yeah.
There we are.
So, Mike Shaw, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. And Councillor Williams has spoken with the monitoring officer in respect of his interest. So I have nothing further to add unless Councillor Williams does.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much. Okay, so item 2 on part 1 is the minutes of the previous meeting, pages 5 to 10. Can I have someone to propose they are a true record?
Move, Chair.
Thank you. Seconded.
I second, Chair.
There we are. I'll accept those. All in favour of that, unless you are not, you disagree with the minutes. If you would just indicate. No, that's fine. Okay, there we are then. Right, so item 3 is to request site visits. At the moment, we are trying to limit, well, not limit, but just not have them because of COVID. I haven't had anybody indicate that they are unhappy with just the plans and things, so we'll go ahead with that one. Right, so item 4 is the main item today. There is only one decision item so far. But before I go to this, there is a supplementary document that was only issued this morning via Steve Ball. So I am going to give a few minutes for those members of committee who haven't perhaps had time to sit and read it. So I'm going to, if you could just indicate when you have, when you are ready to proceed, then that would be good for us. Because if I give you 5 minutes, you might not need it. So if you could just indicate when you've read the supplementary item, and then I'll proceed.
Chair, if I could just advise you as well, we've got Councillor Annette Wingrave who's joined us as the LDP member.
Lovely, thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, how would you like us to indicate? Do you want us to put our little hands up?
If you could just put your hands up as if you were asking a question. have read it, and somebody's just indicating that they've had read it. But I know that this was issued quite late on in this morning, and I know members, some people come on just for the meeting in time. So just to be fair, I'm just allowing members to have that time to read it. If you could just tell me when all the members have indicated, Tammy.
Just a reminder to members, if they could raise their electronic hands once they've read the second amendment sheet, please. Thank you.
There we are. I think we're nearly there now, Tom, aren't we?
Councillor Chris Williams, there we are. Yes, Chair, you're good to go.
Lovely. So if you could just all lower your hands now. Thank you for doing that for me, because as I say, if I give you 5 minutes, you might not have needed the whole 5 minutes. So right, that being said, then I'm going to go to item 4 on the agenda, which is planning application P 2019/5304, which is Aldi Neath Abbey. It's on pages 11 to 80 on your reports. I am going to assume that you've read them. However, if you do have any supplementary questions, obviously we'll follow the protocol. So I will now turn to Steve Ball. If you could perhaps give members an explanation as to why we've had the late submission, and then if you could take members through the application. Members, please bear in mind that there is the planning presentation amendment sheet that Mr. Ball always sends out prior to planning. Mr. Ball, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning yet again, everyone. I'll turn my camera off and I'll share the screen. And if you can let me know, Chair, when you have sight of that, please.
I will. Yes, I can see it.
Right, thank you. Yes, so this is an application P 2019/5304, which is for the erection of a Class A1 food store, as per the description of 1,899 square metres gross floor area, together with associated access and car parking, landscaping, etc. It's on land adjacent to CSM Precision Engineering on Neath Abbey Road, and the applicant is Aldi Stores. As you've said, Chair, there was an amendment sheet circulated as usual yesterday, covering off additional representations made, both from a couple of retail stores or consultants on behalf of them, and also additional representations received from members of the local community. Just to clarify, the number of representations received from the community since the publication report is greater than shown on the amendment sheet, but only those that received up to 2 p.m. cut-off on Friday are included within that sheet.
Understood.
So just in case members of the public are wondering why there's not more stated on there, that's why, because there was a 2 p.m. cut-off.
Right.
The additional clarification sheet was issued, and I do apologise for the lateness of submission, primarily just following some additional review and discussion on the report, and need just to provide some additional clarification, which I could have provided verbally, but I felt it was appropriate because of the complexities of the matters involved. For such an application, it was best to put it in writing so members have got it, so it's quite clear on the basis on what the report is being made, and therefore any decisions being made.
Okay.
Right. So in terms of the site itself, members, again, just for reference for the members of the public here, the members would have received this presentation in advance with all the plans, but I seek to go through. So I wouldn't necessarily refer to every single plan here, but they're there if we wish to discuss them later on in terms of any discussions following my presentation and other presentations. So the application is shown in the site edge red on the plan in front, which is zoomed in on the plan on the right hand side. Is showing it's near the land associated with CSN Engineering, near to the builders, merchants, the electrical site in the front, but also nearby residential properties to the east of the site, including properties on Llys and Rowan Lodge, which is accessed off the main Neath Abbey Road. The aerial photo in front of you indicates the site, so you've got the playing fields. I imagine the majority of those in the meeting will be more than familiar of the site. Come along Neath Abbey Road. As I say, you've got CSN Engineering. This is the wider site with the access both to CSN and coming to the builders merchants as well, with properties on Llys here. And the three properties that are referred to in the report, that the closest properties are Rowan Lodge on the top here. You've got Glyn here on Llys and number 7 Llys as well. But generally, these are the properties on Llys in this residential development nearby. This is just the existing site plan indicating the nature of the access arrangement that show it's serving the two different properties and the vacant land at the front. And the plan in front, which I'll come to later, indicates the development you've got, which is the new access arrangements coming in, which will serve both Aldi, CSN and the builders merchants, the retail store with car parking, landscaping, and note again just the changes that are proposed, which will come to in terms of highways, in terms of changes to the road layout. And the one thing I just referred to in this, in terms of this red line was amended during the course of the application, as a consequence of ongoing highway discussions. So we'll refer to later the fact that the red line is increased, so it includes some land at the frontage of LH Evans Electrical Wholesalers, and the additional land, all of which is necessary to facilitate the required highway improvements to facilitate a safe access and egress from the site. Again, this is just a zoomed in plan indicating the layout, which indicates the main net floor space, the warehouse area, the delivery bays, and just because we'll come to it later, just in terms of you've got the gas coolers and other electrical plant and equipment in this corner here, close to number 7, and this property here, close to CSN Engineering. And again, in a bit more detail. This plan just indicates the external finishes and the elevations. You'll see it's a modern Aldi store of the like that many of you will have seen on Aldi and other similar kind of retailers. The main thing is you've got the main frontage is glazed panelling. You've got the delivery vehicles which come in, and so effectively they're offloading at floor level. So there's a ramp going down into the site, as you can see on the third northeastern facing elevation. Sorry, and generally, so you've got the wraparound glazing on the side towards the car park. And glazing and the CO2 plant, etc. I referred to earlier. And again, these sections are just shown. These show what it is at the moment in terms of the sections through the site. You can see AA going north south and BB going the other way through the site. Indicates what it is at the moment in terms of the existing property for the engineering firm, and indicating the extent of the site. So obviously it shows that the general heights, etc., are very similar to the existing property CSN Engineering. It's a modern flat roof building fitting within the site with a landscaped frontage in terms of car parking and landscaping. And again, just clarification, these are the engineering works necessary to facilitate the changes to the highway, which we'll come back to later, and I imagine Justin will be able to talk you through in a bit more detail from highways. And again, I'll refer to these later in the presentation. Just before I actually go into the report itself, because we haven't managed to do site visits, and because I thought it was best to do so, I've got 3 little videos that walk through the site. And I think what it would enable is if members, during any questions, if you wish me to show any relationship of the site to any adjoining nearby properties or other areas, I can go through this and pause. But if I can just go through each of these briefly. Mm-hmm. These were taken approximately 3 p.m. on one day last week, just for clarification.
Thank you.
So this is from the front, looking across from the playing fields across to the site. You can see the building at the rear, and you can see the residential properties to the side, with the one in the centre being Rowan Lodge, and you've got Glyn here behind, and number 7 Llys further to the rear. And this shows the access into the site to CSN. and the other access point can go into the builders' yards beyond. And this is the land at the frontage that is being changed to facilitate the highway improvements, with this fencing in front of you being pushed back into the site and relocated to accommodate the required vision displays and increased highway widths. This is another site video taken from within the site, looking towards the main road and circling round. Again, showing the residential properties beyond the site boundaries.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Shaw.
Forgive me for interrupting. Steve Ball has gone conspicuously quiet, so I'm not sure. Are we having difficulties with the?
No, Mike. I am here, Mike. I just decided not to talk over that bit because it was I would be repeating what I'd said before.
He was doing his Spielberg bit.
There we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you both.
They always say with commentators, sometimes you have to know when to say something and when not to say something. Well, so I was choosing not to.
Thank you, Mr. Ball. It's not quite a site visit, but I do think this gives members extra information. So I'm very grateful.
Indeed, I agree, and I think also the ability to zoom and actually pause on the relevant points for any discussion later is actually very useful for proper session. So there's one final visit, just shows from the site frontage again. Look at the access with the playing field to the side.
Okay.
And then moving into the site again. I do think, as you say, Chair, that they are very useful in giving a flavour for the impact of the development, both in terms of visually, both in terms of relationship with the highway and the relationship with the neighbouring properties, all of which are critical matters to discuss today.
That's lovely. Thank you.
Right. So I'll now move on to the report, and the report is obviously a lengthy report and complex matters, and I'll try my best just to go through the report, but I won't, I won't be skipping bits, but I would clearly be expecting members to have read the report in detail, so I'll try and pick out the salient points of the report as usual. Yes, Chair.
At what point were you going to give the explanation for the latest amendment?
Oh, sorry, I thought I referred to that earlier. Yes, so in terms of the additional clarification, we ultimately officers reviewed the report, and it was felt that there were certain elements of the report that needed some clarification, both in terms of a couple of minor errors in the report, but also just clarifications to make sure that that members are making a legally robust decision. So what I'll seek to do is I'll try and pick out bits from that additional amendment sheet as we go through into the different parts of the report, if that's
excellent. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So the site in context is described on page 11 of the report, and you will have seen that quite clearly from the videos we've referred to. It is a site measuring just over 1 hectare, so it is a major development. It was subject to pre-application consultation, and obviously we've undertaken the normal consultation, which has resulted in a lot of representations that are all summarised within the report. The red line of the plan I've also referred to having been changed for the highway layout changes, and again those were the subject of additional consultation to ensure that everyone was aware of those changes. The proposed store itself is described on page 12 of the report, which I won't go into other than to emphasise that it's 1,899 square metres with a retail floor area, the net floor area for sales of 1,315, and it is a discount retail proposal with 80% of the area being for convenience goods, which is normal food shopping, and remaining 20% for sale of comparison goods, which is other goods effectively, as I'm sure you're aware with these kind of providers in terms of Aldi, Lidl and the like. We have a small proportion of other goods that are non-food goods. The proposal itself, in terms of the layout, I've explained there's a car park to the front. The car park's got a total of 107 spaces. These include disabled spaces, parent and child spaces, staff spaces, but also electric vehicle charging spaces, which the report refers to as being provided with, also additional spaces ready to be provided with for ducting should or when demand requires them. I emphasise when, because clearly demand for the electric vehicle charging is only going to increase in future years. It also proposes the 7.1 metre wide access, which both allows for two-way traffic, but also will serve the two existing businesses with the right-hand turn lane coming in off the main highway. The representations and comments are all shown within the report, and I won't go into detail other than to emphasise that we've had, as I say, a lot of representations, both in terms of support for the proposal and also objections having been raised from some local people, and also on behalf of retailers in the area, notably Lidl and Morrison's. Excuse me, just zooming down to the main part of the report. So on page 23, the main issues for the application that have been assessed are identified. And effectively, it's whether it represents an acceptable development having regard to land use development plan policy, particularly issues in terms of the impact on retail centres, and also other issues to do with visual amenity, character, ecology, land contamination, renewable energy, residential amenity, etc., which I'll come through in turn. So moving first onto the principle of development in terms of the retail assessment, the application site lies within the settlement limits, but it is not allocated for a retail land use. So therefore, policy R3 is the critical policy, which is referred to in bottom page 23 and top of page 24, which identifies 4 different criterion against which need to be assessed. And these are largely in accordance with the advice within Planning Policy Wales 10 and Technical Advice Note 4, which also cover both general matters in terms of PPW as well as retailing, and TAN 4, which is the retail technical advice note that seeks to review such matters. Although the actual size of the store is below a threshold, we do have a retail statement which has been backed up by additional clarifications in terms of retail policy update, which included further survey work that was requested, retail need and impact addendums, and also an additional recent response in January 2021. All of which members should note that we have appointed a retail consultant as an expert to advise officers and thus the authority on the determination of this application. And this report leans heavily on the advice from the retail consultant, who is an independent person reviewing the submissions made on behalf of the applicant, but also who has reviewed in detail the submissions made on behalf of Lidl and Morrison's as other retailers in the area. So that advice has been significantly influencing our report. First of all, in terms of policy R3 criterion 1, the issue there is to identify, to consider whether or not there is a need for the development, so a retail need. And a retail need, effectively, in terms of the advice given, can be both quantitative, which effectively is providing, in terms of providing kind of, that there's additional capacity for the provision of it, in terms of unmet demand, effectively, or qualitative, which can relate to issues effectively to do with like a lack of retail quality and range of goods or accessibility. So in terms of the first part of it, the report does emphasise some comments have been made on behalf of objectors related to a Court of Appeal judgment on Waterstone Estates, which I won't go into lots of detail because ultimately the conclusion in this report is actually that there is a need for the development, which is a qualitative need. But it's just referred to in the report because there's emphasis from the objectors that if a need cannot be demonstrated, that an application should automatically be refused, and there's no need to go on to further tests. As I say, in this case, we've concluded there is a need for the development, but in any respect, our view is that it would not be fatal to the application if officers had not, or if members do not consider there's a need. Ultimately, it then falls to consider whether there's other material considerations of sufficient weight to outweigh any lack of need. So we feel we could go to that, but as this report has not done so, because we have emphasised or concluded there is a need. So moving on to that, in terms of page 25 of the report, first deals with quantitative need, which is the unmet demand side of things. And very, very briefly, although the applicants consider that there was a quantitative need, our retail assessment and advisor has reviewed all the submissions in detail and has concluded that there is not a demonstrable quantitative need for the convenience goods floor space element. And therefore, excuse me, that is the first part of it. And planning policy Wales, as in page 25 refers to, that quantifiable unmet demand is one thing, and precedence should be given to establishing quantitative need before we move on to qualitative. But it doesn't mean that just because it hasn't got quantitative need, that it can't meet the need test. Ultimately, we need to consider now whether it has a qualitative need to comply with criterion 1. And as you'll know from reading the report, that is the conclusions we have reached. So there have been a number of different submissions, and it is a very complex matter, which is why we have an independent retail consultant to review and provide advice both on the submissions made and in reviewing the submissions made on behalf of nearby retail as well. And ultimately, the report goes into issues of qualitative need, which, as I say, seeks to cover things like the retail quality and range of goods and accessibility. Excuse me. And ultimately, the submissions have concluded from Aldi that they feel there is a clear qualitative need for a new discount food retailer in the area. Our consultant has reviewed all those submissions, as I've said, including the representations, and generally is stating that there is, little's changed since previous studies, which have concluded that there's a good range of facilities in the area, and effectively saying that this doesn't suggest a strong material deficiency, but the existing, there is a good level of choice, but ultimately issues to do with leakage of expenditure and accessibility and car journeys, etc. The retail consultant has certainly indicated that there is weight to be attributed to those in terms of assessing the qualitative side of things. So in particular, it's accepted by the consultant that's working on that there is a significant leakage of expenditure out of the area. So effectively out of the Neath area. I think it's only 65% of the food amounts being spent is actually retained within the Neath area. So there is a lot of expenditure leaking away, and ultimately this benefit or this proposal certainly has the potential benefit to not only add to choice and competition as a positive factor, but also contributing to a reduction in car journeys and mileage, particularly associated with those leaking from the Neath area. On that point, I'm just going to cross-reference to the amendment sheet 2, Chair.
Yep.
Which emphasises ultimately the looking at that issue effectively. So the report notes the accepted benefits, and one of those, as I say, is that it would contribute to a reduction in car journeys. Now, as the report says later on in the report, we should not be placing undue weight upon the identity of a particular occupier when giving weight to retail planning policy. And overall, the conclusions reached within the report in terms of the car journeys, the leakage and the accessibility and other matters raised within the report all come to add weight together to come to the overall conclusion. But one part of the overall conclusion is indeed, while we haven't reached it because it's an Aldi, as I said, we shouldn't really be unduly relying upon it. Ultimately, the submissions made by the applicant and accepted by our retail consultant is that this development would address an existing deficiency in Aldi store provision, and therefore it's entirely possible and reasonable to conclude that addressing that deficiency would be part of the reduction in number of food shopping trips which are leaking away. Ultimately, the decision we're making is because we're seeking to avoid the leakage of expenditure away from the area, and that's so a new development of the type proposed, i.e. a discount food provider, has a role to play in that. But what the amendment sheet indicates is that the fact that it is Aldi, which is underrepresented, means that those general conclusions that we reach based upon the type of development mean that that conclusion is more likely to occur in terms of significant reduction in car trips. And therefore, while we're not unduly placing reliance upon the occupier, there are sound planning reasons for considering such benefits, i.e. car reductions, when reaching such a conclusion. So ultimately, in terms of the conclusion of the qualitative side, it's within the report and covered within the amendment sheets we've referred to, but ultimately we are concluding that the applicant has satisfactorily demonstrated that it would meet a qualitative need. And in that regard, while the weight is lesser than if it were to meet quantitative and qualitative, nevertheless, we consider it would comply with the over requirement of criterion 1 to demonstrate a need for the development. We then move on, as the report does, in terms of the other parts of the criterion, in terms of policy R3. The second one relates to sequential test, and I won't go through all the details within there, but ultimately a sequential test has been submitted. We have reviewed their submissions, which find there's no alternative sequentially preferable sites within the centre, edge of centre, or preferable outer centre locations. And we accept those submissions and we feel it's robust and would comply with criterion 2. Excuse me. In terms of criterion 3, the impact on the existing retail centres, the submissions have looked into primarily the impact on Neath town centre, but also other centres, including primarily for Skewing, which have been addressed within the report. Very much in summary, the retail council has looked at all the submissions that are made and does not completely agree with the submissions made by Aldi, or indeed necessarily on behalf of Lidl and Morrison's, but obviously they have given their own review and come to their own conclusions. Generally speaking, I say particularly issues in terms of trade diversion from different stores, they're not necessarily agreeing with the submission, and particularly they feel that a higher amount of convenience goods expenditure will be diverted from existing food stores in Neath than is submitted by the applicant. They do also conclude that the largest amount of diversion would come from the nearby Tesco's, also from Lidl, but the large amount of diversion would be from the Vale and Neath retail Lidl, but also that they're saying a higher amount of trade is likely to be diverted from the town centre Morrison store due to its retail offer and proximity to the application site. The report also looks into the issues in terms of Morrison's, and one thing, obviously Morrison's now form part of a town centre defined in the local development plan, and it is important to ensure that the impact of the development wouldn't unacceptably undermine that store or the health of a town centre, particularly through potential loss of linked trips. And the report does emphasise that if people are diverted away from Morrison's and didn't come into the town centre, that has some potential impact, of course, but at the same time, the additional clawback of expenditure being brought to Aldi, that there would also be, albeit a smaller amount than would be from a town centre store, there would still potentially be a degree of linked trips from the new or retained provision within Neath that has some benefit as well. But the report does conclude that there will be some impact on the town centre, but ultimately what the advice has been issued is looked at the wider health of the town centre, which ultimately all town centres are having some concerns, obviously in terms of the retail environment, even pre-COVID, obviously. But even though he's concluding that there'll be less trade diverted from outside of stores and that there will be a slightly higher amount of trade diverted from Morrison's, ultimately the conclusions that he has reached effectively is that while the likely impact would be complex, and as I say, there are differences of opinion, particularly from Aldi, from the representation made on behalf of Lidl and on behalf of Morrison's. The advice that we are being given, on which the basis decision, is that the test is whether vitality and viability will be undermined, and it's his opinion, and as the report indicates, that while there will be a diversion and an adverse financial impact, the vitality and viability will not be materially undermined, such that there wouldn't be a conflict against policy R32. In other words, he feels we could not sustain any objection based upon impact grounds, because it has to be a significant enough impact to demonstrate that it would justify a refusal on that grounds. And he certainly has consistently given us the advice throughout the course of this application that on impact grounds we should not be refusing the application. The report does then just briefly touch upon the fact that we're in a unprecedented situation in terms of the pandemic, and it clearly is a matter that is of profound importance in so many different ways at the moment. And the report tries to address the issue in terms of an understanding of potential impacts. And obviously there is a risk, as the report says, that the impacts of COVID could be greater than predicted, but equally that they could bounce back, especially where, such as in Neath, where we are investing in the town centres through the Transforming Towns agenda, for example, with the large the next phase of the leisure centre and retail-led development. Ultimately, we felt it wouldn't be appropriate to be seeking any more information from the applicants, because at the moment it's simply it's not possible to understand and predict those impacts. The advice from the consultant is ultimately that there are no evidential grounds to justify refusal based upon a potential perceived greater impact as a result of the pandemic, and therefore, as I say, the conclusions within the report is that the scale of the impact wouldn't be to such a degree to unacceptably undermine vitality and viability, and on that basis that we wouldn't be able to warrant refusal on such grounds. The report also, excuse me. Sorry, Chair, my report's frozen on me.
Yeah, these things happen, Mr. Ball's all right.
Right, I think it might be the battery in my mouse actually, but there we are. The report also goes into impact on other centres, notably in terms of skew, and has concluded, as it shows on page 34, that there wouldn't be an unacceptable impact on that district centre either. And also in terms of criterion 4, it's concluded that, again, there may be a degree of impact, but ultimately we do not consider this proposal would unacceptably impact on the hierarchy of the retail or any regeneration schemes in the area, such that pulling together all those issues in terms of the assessment for policy R3 and planning policy Wales, it is a very complex analysis. I've sought to summarise it, and I'm sure members would have read in detail how we've reached the conclusion, both in the report and through the associated amendment sheets. Ultimately, it does accept that there's a qualitative need but no quantitative need, and while the weight is lesser than if it had both, it would still comply with need, and therefore, because we've also been satisfied it's passed those further 3 tests, that the general principle of this retail development is thus accepted in accordance with policy R3. The report then also looks in terms of economic benefits and explains that clearly this is a new development that has potential to have economic benefits associated with that, both in terms of the full-time permanent jobs, which is 27 full-time equivalents, which is 40 positions in total. It also looks at issues in terms of the wages generated by the employees, opportunities including locally during the construction period, and additional earnings in that regard, and also massive gross value added generated by the development. And all of those, in terms of introducing new major retail development into the area and local employment opportunities, are considered to be positive and add weight to the conclusion to recommend an approval of this development. Moving on to matters of visual amenity, I've already shown you in terms of the report itself. Oh, excuse me again, Chair. My
no.
It literally is the battery on my mouse has run out, so I'm going to have to use it on my touchscreen. So
all right.
Excuse me 1 second. I'm just moving through. So so the report in terms of visual amenity has gone in detail, and I've already shown you on the presentation the elevations and how it would fit within the site, both in terms of being set towards the back of the site, in terms of the general scale and form of developments considered to be appropriate, both in relation to the adjoining residential properties, but also the scale and form of the nearby commercial properties, because it is a mixed resi and commercial location. We're quite satisfied in terms of the design of the property, in terms of its interaction with the public realm, and in terms of the landscaping of the site, and in terms of the general modern look of the store. And within that regard, we're quite satisfied that it would have no unacceptable impact, and indeed would, result in this vacant part of the site being developed in improving the appearance in terms of would be visually appropriate. The report covers a couple of minor matters that are covered by conditions in terms of the fencing and matters related to compounds, and all of those are dealt with through through conditions. Moving on, page 39, in terms of residential amenity, the impact on nearby properties have been considered in a lot of detail within the report, and it may well be teased out in further discussions. I've already referred to the nearest residential properties located to the east of the site, which are the Rowan Lodge, Glynhere and number 7 Fleesacoid, all of which, just as the report notes, have objected to this proposal on a variety of different issues. Mm-hmm. In terms of the relationship of the store itself, potential overbearing or overshadowing impacts, the report on page 39 and 40 talks about the relationship, and in terms of it being in terms of the closeness of it to property. I'll just try and okay, I'm struggling with my presentation. I can't go back to the screen at the moment. Bear with me. So in terms of that relationship, it does emphasize that yes, it's relatively close to those properties, but in terms of the levels, the heights of the property and how it relates to it, we're quite satisfied that it would not have an unacceptable impact within the context of that new store proposal, to the extent that there be any justified objections to be raised in terms of any overbearing or overshadowing impact on those properties. And
right,
similar.
If I could just interrupt you there, Mr.
Yes, of course.
I just wanted to emphasise to members of the public and to the committee that although you're not able to share your screen, we all have these presentations that we can actually see and look upon. So the fact that Mr. Ball is having difficulty putting it on the screen, nonetheless, all members have seen this and can reference it. So thank you, Mr. Ball. Sorry, just wanted to emphasise that.
No, thank you, Chair. And it's just typical. Literally, I'm turning the mouse on and off, and occasionally I'm getting a bit of juice in it. So I've gone, as you see, I've shared the layout, which indicates the relationship with the nearby properties, because we're on that section at the moment. So
okay.
In terms of sorry. In terms of overlooking, the report on page 40 refers to cover issues in terms of small windows, etc., that have been covered within conditions. There's also been some concern raised in terms of the siting of an outdoor amenity area nearby number 7 Fleesacoid, which on the presentation, if you can see my cursor, is an area just at the top here. There's a small sitting out area for staff to have a degree of break, which is required by policy OS1, and the report concludes that given where it is, it's sited behind the large acoustic enclosure and behind the garage, and relationship with the property is considered to be acceptable, to the extent that that there wouldn't be any unacceptable impact or nuisance to neighbouring properties as a consequence of that location. And similarly, in terms of the relationship with CSN Engineering, the building has been located proximate to that building. But again, we're satisfied with that impact. It would not be unacceptable. It would just be a minor impact, and also that the applicants or the land is generally owned by CNS CSN in any respect. A large part of the residential amenity section then goes into issues in terms of noise impacts, and ultimately, at the outset, as the report on page 41 does indicate, our environmental health officer or officers have been engaged with us and the applicants on this scheme, and ultimately they did express concern and have wished for it to be emphasised that they've expressed concerns that ideally the greater protection for amenity of local residents would be achieved by siting the noisiest parts of development away from the nearest noise sensitive receptors, i.e. the nearby houses. In this case, as the picture on the screen shows, you've got the delivery bay, you've got some gas and you've got some gas coolers which are located on the side closest to the boundary, and ideally they would be located away from it, and therefore with additional degree of attenuation by reason of distance and the attenuation from the building itself. But ultimately, while it is potentially likely that some complaints might be received from operations and activities associated with the store, ultimately the noise predictions do generally appear to show that engineering controls would reduce noise exposure to what would be deemed an acceptable level. But there are a number of significant conditions that are placed upon this proposal within the recommendation to ensure that those impacts are mitigated to an acceptable degree. That doesn't get away from the fact that ideally it would be cited in a different way, but we, as members will know, ultimately it is necessary to determine the application before us and to therefore consider not what they might better have done, but what they're proposing. Will that have an adverse impact, or can any identified impacts be controlled by a combination of design and conditions, which is what the report concludes is the case. Excuse me. So I won't go into huge detail on the noise surveys, because again they are technical matters, and if there's any clarification, we do have an environmental health colleague if necessary here. But very much as a in a general comment, all the noise survey submissions that have been submitted do find this already to be a relatively noisy site, a relatively noisy climate, and that's a combination of both the traffic from Neath Abbey Road, from the A465 much further beyond to the south, but also the fact that it is a mixed commercial and residential environment. Those sources, as I say, do include the industrial type noises, particularly from the builders merchants to the west, and the submissions do show that excuse me, in relatively early hours as well, which obviously is one of the areas overnight and in the early hours in the morning, the need to control limits. And it does show that particularly the noise levels beyond about 5 o'clock and 7 o'clock in the morning already have the potential to exceed the internal bedroom noise criteria and lead to likely sleep disturbance. So this isn't a site where it's introducing a new use, which it's very, very quiet. It's introducing a new use into an area that already does have a noise climate which it's relatively high. So within that context, it is important to make sure, both in terms of the nature of the activities, in terms of potential intermittent or impulsive sounds related to the activities, but also particularly the issues to do with fixed mechanical services and plant are controlled to an acceptable level. So, excuse me, the report does go into a lot of detail on those. It's particularly noted, having regard to complaints from the nearby properties, that the fixed plant that's being placed on the site closest to number 7 Cleesecoid, which again is this area in this top right hand corner near number 7. These the applicant has actually right from the start put these down as what they call ultra low noise gas coolers, and ultimately that's with the intention of ensuring that the rating level of those and the potential for impact associated with those is mitigated, and ultimately, in addition to the acoustic fencing which I've referred to, but would be placed along the top boundary as you see on the plan in front of you, which will go from 2 meters high up to 2.5 meters high, closest to the property of number 7 in England here, where the coolers are, for example. That provided that is provided on the site and retained, and also subject to the condition that's stated on page 44 there in terms of the actual noise rating levels of plant as measured and determined at the nearest noise sensor receptors, i.e. the houses, that we are satisfied that those the combination of those controls, both in terms of acoustic, fencing and conditions, would ensure there be no unacceptable impact from the fixed plant or equipment. Similarly, in terms of the noise from the delivery and servicing activities, the report on page 45 has got an extract from the plan, which, if I which if members can view on the report or their own presentation I've sent through, it shows a section through the delivery bay, and it indicates while the delivery bay is relatively proximate to the nearby properties, you do have the acoustic fencing close to those boundaries, and also the nature of the delivery bay is such that the delivery lorries reverse into, so that they are at a lower level and they are partly within a building, and ultimately, excuse me, the delivery scheme. Sorry, I'm just looking at the report. See, the quiet delivery scheme has been put in, which seeks to ensure the deliveries are made in a quiet manner, particularly having regard to that. And the report concludes that, subject to controls which both ensure deliveries are made between only effectively during the daytime, 7 a.m. up to 10 p.m. That other controls in terms of the acoustic fencing and the compliance with the quiet delivery scheme, that there would be appropriate controls to ensure that the residential amenity is protected and therefore complying with the LTP policies within the report. And similarly, in terms of generally noise from customer parking activity, etc., would also be controlled to acceptable levels as a consequence. Noting the concerns of environmental health about this proposal, there are 2 additional conditions that are imposed, which are important to impose and in combination with all the others I've referred to, as such to make this development acceptable in our eyes. And the first one of those is, we've had, what happens with these submissions is you get noise predictions and assessments submitted in terms of noise assessment, which have indicated that this can be constructed and operated to an acceptable level. But the first thing is a condition would actually require a noise assessment to actually evaluate the actual noise impact of the development within 3 months of it becoming fully operational. The point being with this is to make sure that the predictions are indeed correct, and if there are any issues identified that are higher than those predicted noise levels, that actions are taken to actually ensure the noise limitations within the condition are met. So a condition is imposed in that regard, but also there's a complaints condition which effectively gives us an opportunity, in the event that we feel that justified complaint has been submitted, i.e. something that clearly indicates that there is an issue at the store, that we can require the operator to do further work to actually to assess and identify what's happening, and to submit further report to put in place any additional control measures recommended to mitigate any impacts identified to an acceptable level. And subject to those conditions, again, we're satisfied about those impacts. And finally, in terms of noise, construction activity, as ever, any construction would always have a degree of impact. We will have a construction environmental management plan, which is relatively standard. Members will know in terms of how these things work in terms of deliveries and the like. But because of the relationship of this to the nearby properties, we actually specifically placed a condition which requires and restricts the hours of working on the site, as page 47 says, to between the hours of 8 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock during the weekdays, 8 o'clock and 1:30 on Saturdays, and not working on Sundays or bank holidays. And ultimately, that's to ensure that the impact of this development is mitigated on the nearby properties. And finally, in terms of residential amenity, we don't have full details of the external lighting proposed for the building or the site, but a condition is placed on there to ensure that we are satisfied that there's no unacceptable light spill, for example, on those properties, as well as issues to do with the hours of operation of those, to ensure that there will be no unacceptable impacts arising from external lighting. So in regard to the residential conclusion, bottom of page 48, all of those issues together, and as I say, I've skipped through them, and the report goes into a lot of detail, but ultimately we have concluded that the impacts on residential amenity would be able to be mitigated and controlled to an acceptable level, such we should not be objecting on such grounds. And paused. Highway safety. I'm going to try and get the right slide back up again if I can, just because it is useful to see for members. Here we are. Right, so the report goes into a lot of detail about the impacts, and I imagine they will probably be best left for any discussion over highway impacts with Justin on behalf of the Highway Authority. There have been a lot of discussions, and I'll be honest with you, when this application first came in, and having regard to previous refusal on site and highway grounds, I did feel that it was going to be difficult for them to demonstrate that safe access and egress from this site could be achieved. But what the submissions have shown, and over time, in terms of both review of the assessments submitted, from the higher authorities' perspective, having reviewed additional data that we as an authority have, but also with changes being made to the scheme to incorporate additional land to provide the appropriate visibility displays to achieve the correct distances in terms of both in terms of the right-hand turning lane that you'll see on the screen, the widths of the two sides of the carriageway to ensure that that they're acceptable, and also the highways in terms of the visibility displays and the pedestrian linkages. Ultimately, just on behalf of the highway authority, reviewed all of the matters have been submitted and has concluded that the capacity of the net would not be unacceptably affected by this new development, and also that subject to the scheme being implemented in full that's in front of you on the screen, that there would be no unacceptable impact in terms of the ability to access and exit this site in an appropriate way. That is a conclusion that's been reached, as I say, following a substantial amount of assessment. There are a number of conditions that are imposed upon the proposal, including related to requirement for a staff travel plan and the provision of visibility displays, as we talked about. There is condition 4 is important for members to note as well, though, particularly insofar as the report says on the bottom of page 52, there are additional areas of land that are necessary to form this, which are not currently in the control of the applicant. There's a very small area of unregistered land, and there's also issues to do with the ownership of adjoining occupants. What condition 4 seeks to do is, while we are satisfied that all those works within the plan can legally be provided, particularly through a combination of what's called section 278 and section 228 highway works, the report currently requires all of these works to be undertaken before they can start construction on the store itself, primarily because there's a small degree of legal uncertainty at this time, and so we want to make sure that we have a full guarantee, effectively, that those works can and will legally be provided in full prior to the store being operational. The condition at the moment requires them not to build the store beyond at this moment, because we want to make sure that we're not left in a situation where a store has been built but cannot be safely accessed. It may well be that that development will be able to progress in a different way as soon as the legal matters are resolved, but at this time, that condition 4, which is a grampian condition, is considered necessary to ensure that we have complete control over those access works. The report then goes into other issues in terms of internal layout and parking arrangements, and I won't go into lots of detail other than to say that the highways officers are satisfied with the scheme in terms of its layout, and the report does show that they're ultimately, in terms of the parking standards, they are providing more spaces than necessary for strictly necessary in terms of the parking standards, but the report indicates, both in terms of its size and its location in terms of the on the key bus route, etc., and also provision of electric vehicle points, etc., that the report has concluded that that we would not be able to object on those grounds. So therefore, there's no objection being raised in that regard, and similarly subject conditions in terms of for deliveries being controlled on highway grounds. The highway officers has raised no objection to the scheme, and we consider that appropriate condition can cover off all the potential impacts upon highway pedestrian safety to the extent that the proposal is acceptable in that regard. The report then moves on to other matters. Contaminated land is not considered to be a particular issue here, subject to conditions requested both by our land contamination officer and indeed by Natural Resources Wales. Excuse me. Flooding is covered on page 55 and also covered off in the additional amendment sheet. This just provides a clarification. Ultimately, there is a small part of a site, as shown on the plan on the top of page 56, members. You'll note that the blue part of the site shows a part of the site is in blue, but also the building is partially the very bottom bottom southern corner is slightly impinged upon that C2 zone. So ultimately, this proposal is a less vulnerable development. It's not a residential development. We've required a flood consequences assessment to be submitted, and we've gone through the tests within within technical advice note 15 in terms of the impacts. Ultimately, as the amendment sheet clarifies, we're satisfied it while not meeting criterion 1, it does meet criterion 2 in terms of the employment objectives. And also, as the amendment sheet clarifies, we do consider it to be previously developed land, notably because this formed part of the curtilage of an existing the developed site. Ultimately, what the amendment sheet, and I'm just moving to it now, excuse me, does emphasise is third-party flood risk, which is when potential additional amount of flood water could go outside of the boundary, which cannot be mitigated within the site. There is a very slight risk of flooding being increased elsewhere, which is onto the affected owner of in terms of CSN. So it is technically contrary to the requirements of Appendix 1 of TAN 15, but this is an approach, particularly in terms of the adjoining owner accepting that increased risk, which we have adopted elsewhere on other sites, for example, both in Harbourside and the former Port Talbot police station in Port Talbot. And therefore, the very minor risk, the neighbouring land use isn't vulnerable itself, and therefore the conclusion is that the minor breach of that the flooding wides would be acceptable in that regard. So there's no objection being raised to this development in terms of the impacts from flooding, subject to conditions that are proposed in terms of making users aware of potential flood risk and the like, which is covered by a condition. Drainage is covered on page 58, but large is requirement for the SUDS approving body, obviously the council, to approve any matters through a SARB application. So there's no issues from planning in that regard, but some conditions in terms of requirement for details of foul drainage schemes and the like to come in from Welsh Water. Similarly, biodiversity covers off the matters and very much there's no adverse impacts in that regard, as it says that ultimately there are some enhancements being provided to the site through the appropriate landscaping scheme, even though there are some mature trees and small buildings being demolished. There's limited impact on bats, for example, so there's no objections raised on biodiversity grounds, or indeed in terms of any impact on nearby trees, including those to the nearby boundaries to the south-eastern boundary, which have some trees protected by a TPRisation order, but we're satisfied that subject to conditions for fencing, etc., that there'd be no unacceptable impact on those trees. I'm mindful this is going on now, this report, but obviously it does demonstrate that there's a lot of issues to address, Chair. So I'm on page 60 now in terms of archaeology. This site has actually previously had archaeological evaluation work, which has identified certain archaeological materials, etc., within the site. There's also nearby, as you'll know, in terms of nearby scheduled monument for the Neath Roman site. Excuse me. Ultimately, there's no objection on archaeological grounds, but there is some high potential for further features to be encountered, which needs to be mitigated. So a condition being imposed requiring historic environment mitigation. In addition, there's impacts in terms of the monuments are referred to, particularly on GM 215, excuse me, and as reference to a Roman road which was in the area. So ultimately, subject to mitigation measures being proposed to reduce the impact, both CADU and GGAT are satisfied. So there are conditions that would require interpretation boards and something, actually, for example, different colours of tarmac or materials within the site indicating the route of the road across the car park. Though those aren't shown on plans at the moment because there was an iteration of one of the plans, so there's a condition that specifically requires those works to be provided on site and with the mitigation measures, and subject to that condition, CADU have not objected, and nor do we as planning officers. Finally, matters to renewable energy. We've had a renewable energy assessment that's been submitted as expected by policy, which covers certain additional waste heat recovery, for example, which would be controlled by condition to the extent it's acceptable, and similarly in terms of policy W3 waste, and also in terms of the open space provision I talked to you about the outdoor amenity space for staff being provided. Subject to all of those issues and the conclusion on page 65 onwards is that the application should be approved subject to conditions from page 66 onwards. And that concludes probably a longer presentation than I expected, Chair, but I hope that that's gone through in lots of detail for members to cover off all the issues. And I apologise for my technical difficulties.
No, don't worry, Mr. Ball. I think that's the longest I've heard you speak continually for some time now. And I do understand you've got a little bit of a cough as well. So I thank you for persevering. It was a long report, but I think indeed necessary. Okay, thank you. You can have a slight respite now before answering questions while we go to our speakers. So what will happen now is that I will call on the two registered speakers, Esther Thomas and Rob Jones. Welcome to the committee. You will both have 5 minutes, and Tammy is our Democratic Service Officer, will put the clock on you and advise you when you have 1 minute left, just to give you a brief interruption. If you're not used to public speaking, it can be very daunting. So thank you for coming along and willing to go through and tell us what you've come to say today. So Tammy, are you ready? Mr. Shaw, you wanted to say something?
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Forgive me for interrupting. I saw that Councillor Stephen Hunt's hand was up, Madam. So
I do apologise, Councillor Hunt. What would you like to say before we go to speakers?
Yes, Chair. I just didn't know the process of the way you're running it. Were we to have introduction from the highway after Mr. Ball, so we have a better understanding of the complexity there before the speakers? Or
no,
are you going to have the speakers then go back to the highways? Or is it important to have the highways?
Yeah, what I would rather do, I think Mr. Ball spoke for almost an hour there. What I would rather do is go to questions after all the speakers, and then anybody who has highway questions, I will then go to Justin and he can answer any questions members have. I don't know, Justin, whether you wish to make a formal sort of short presentation.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, I've written a statement that I would like to read when it's possible.
In that case, then, yeah, all right, then I can see where you're going, Mr. Councillor Hunt. In that case, we'll have our registered speakers, and then before I open it up to the people who've already submitted questions or whatever, I will go to Justin for his sort of small report within the report, and then afterwards members who have any questions on highways will be able to refer back to Justin Griffiths. Is that okay with you, Mr. Hunt, Councillor Hunt?
Yes, fine, Chair. Thank you for that.
All right then, fine. There we are then. Tammy, are you ready with the clock?
I am, Chair.
Thank you. So the first speaker today is Esther Thomas, and Esther, welcome, and you have 5 minutes, so begin in your own time. I'm sorry to say that if you haven't finished after 5 minutes, we will have to just cut it short at that point. All right, so please address the committee with what you have to say.
Chair, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you on behalf of the residents most affected by this proposal. Please consider this application very carefully, as your decision today will have a substantial impact on our day-to-day activities for the rest of our lives, and will cause everyone living on Neath Abbey Road and the wider vicinity a great deal of stress and inconvenience. The traffic on this stretch is already very heavy at all times of the day, but during peak times, the road is almost gridlocked in both directions, due in part to Tesco, Dwyrafelin School, Neath Talbot College, Sports Centre, other commercial and industrial units, and creating the extra entrance lane will actually cause further delays by causing cars to queue back to the Tesco roundabout, creating more chaos. Volume of traffic from the nearby villages of Brincoch, Rose, Cardickston, etc. converge in this narrow corridor of the A474, the easiest access to the A465 and M4. We regularly face intolerable delays trying to leave or enter our homes at peak times. Many of us have experienced near misses when joining the main road, and several school pupils have been involved in accidents here. The sports centre is very popular and the car park is often overflowing, and when matches or sessions finish, the exodus of traffic leaving the campus causes frustration and has again resulted in several collisions. Since the original application by Aldi to build on this site, a large number of new houses have been built into the surrounding areas, and there are plans, I believe, to build another 200 in Riddings, which will add to the volume of traffic, further causing further congestion and pollution. The noise and air pollution caused by this excessive traffic at a standstill for lengthy delays, generating exhaust fumes in such a narrow corridor, is a real concern and will have an adverse effect on the health of pupils attending Dwyrafelin and those using the sports fields. Officers told us previously that the A474 cannot be widened along Dwyrafelin Road because of potential archaeological constraints. Therefore, the problem along the whole stretch from the lights near the college to the Tesco roundabout can't be alleviated. Aldi is one of the most popular food retailers, and if this store is built on this site, it will attract shoppers in cars from a wide area, significantly adding to the congestion, traffic delays, and result in further air and noise pollution. Our local councillor admitted to us that she avoids this stretch and finds a different route. The planning application submitted to this committee is inaccurate in that the number of objections is much higher than quoted, and the majority in support of people who live outside the area and will not be adversely affected on a daily basis and cannot fully appreciate the lengthy delays already prevalent. This includes Aldi's recent social media post to gather support for this application. The privacy and soundscape for those living next to the site will be adversely impacted. The noisiest part of the store, unloading bay, etc., to be sited next to the closest houses. These additional noises and car doors and boot slamming, which incidentally can't be controlled, will take the existing high noise level to serious annoyance levels, as determined by the World Health Organization, which Council must have a regard to when considering planning applications. Policy BU1 of the LDP Criterion 4 stipulates that any development should not have an adverse impact upon the amenity of the occupants of adjacent land. Policy EN8 states that the proposal is likely to expose people to risks such as noise pollution should not be approved. I do not accept that Aldi's proposed actions to mitigate the noise pollution will address the soundscape issues for this community. I would also question
1 minute remaining.
I would also question the need for another food store in this area. We can walk to Tesco's Superstore, Tesco Express, Morrison's, Lidl, Marks and Spencer's, Iceland, B&M, 3 convenience stores, plus the many local shops in Neath Town and within Neath Market. There's already an Aldi store 3.78 miles away in Llansamlet and 8.4 miles to Talbot. And given that a store built in Neath Abbey will attract shoppers from travelling in cars rather than the footfall, those distances are perfectly reasonable. Several shops have closed in Neath Town Centre. Is it not possible or sensible to consider using some of those empty premises? Because that would attract people then into the town centre itself. I urge you to consider this planning application very carefully and apply due diligence. Please ask yourselves why this application was rejected by the Planning Committee over 10 years ago on the grounds of traffic congestion. The situation now is 10 times worse than it was because of housing developments, the rise in pupils numbers in Dwyrafelin school, and given the valid points I made, please reject this proposal.
Time.
Request that officers support Aldi to find a more suitable site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas, for coming and giving us your views there. Now I will turn to Rob Jones, who's Aldi's Regional Property Director, who would like to speak as well. Mr. Jones, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. So my name is Rob Jones. I'm the Regional Property Director for Aldi, responsible for bringing forward the Neath Abbey Road site. I would first like to take the opportunity to offer Aldi's support for the communities across Neath-Port Talbot in these uncertain and unprecedented times, especially to those residents who continue to perform vital services across the borough. With regards to our application, which is before you this morning, our plans for a new discount community food store on Neath Abbey Road represents a multi-million-pound investment into the local economy and wider supply chain, creating up to 40 new full and part-time jobs, which will be paid at £9.55 per hour as a minimum, well above the government's national living wage. Importantly, the proposals would also see the retention of the existing business, CSN Precision Engineering, on the site. We fully understand and appreciate the concerns of properties neighbouring the site. As part of our pre-application engagement, I sought to discuss the proposal with immediate neighbours on a one-to-one basis, seeking to allay any concerns and identify opportunities for mitigation very early on in the process. Aldi is keen to ensure that our stores are a sympathetic neighbour, and the proposals before you today have been designed in order to minimise any negative effect on surrounding properties. As part of the closely managed servicing arrangement for all of our stores, all manoeuvring takes place within the site, and our unique delivery ramp arrangement removes the need for any external activity. This process is not only efficient, but also ensures that loading and unloading can take place internally, thus reducing noise disturbance to neighbouring properties. We have also proactively included a number of measures to minimise the impact of day-to-day store operations, including installing ultra-low noise emitting plant, providing a 2.5 metre high acoustic fence on the site's eastern boundary, and agreeing to a condition which restricts delivery times in order to reduce the potential disturbance to neighbouring properties. Aldi welcomes the conclusions in your officer's report on this issue, namely that our proposals would not lead to an unacceptable overbearing or overshadowing issues, and that residential amenity can be suitably protected through conditions attached to the planning application. Aldi understands a significant focus which is placed on the capacity of the existing highways network around the Neath Abbey Road site. We've worked closely with the Council's highways team throughout the determination process, and we are confident that our proposed solution will deliver a safe and secure access to the new store and existing CSN Precision Engineering site, as well as significant improvements on pedestrian safety. Our plans will deliver an improved straightened access to our store and existing businesses on the site off Neath Abbey Road, a dedicated right-hand turn lane from Neath Abbey Road helping to maintain traffic flow, free customer car parking for 107 cars, including 5 electric car charging points, as well as dedicated disabled spaces, parent and child spaces, and secure cycle parking. Improved pedestrian and cycle access to the site, ensuring customers have the opportunity to travel safely and sustainably to the new store. As part of our application, we have conducted a retail impact assessment, which has found that many of Neath's residents are currently travelling to do their food shopping elsewhere, but particularly to out-of-town stores in Swansea. Responses to our public consultation also confirmed that a large number of local residents choose to visit one of Aldi's other stores in Llansamlet or Port Talbot as part of their weekly shop. Our plans for the Neath Abbey Road site will improve local choice and help to keep more Neath residents shopping in the town as opposed to travelling to stores further afield. Furthermore, Aldi's business model is such that a visit to one of our stores is often one of several linked trips as a shopper makes on any given day. Aldi stores do not include a bakery, butchers or fishmongers, or services such as post office, shoe repair or dry cleaners. An Aldi store on Neath Abbey Road would therefore not only help prevent spend leaking out of Neath to existing out-of-town stores, but would also deliver increased footfall and economic benefits to existing smaller independent businesses in the area through linked trips. It should be noted that the Council's independent advisor on retail matters, Avison Young, confirms the proposal is policy compliant in respect of the retail need, impact and sequential tests. I would also like to take this opportunity to reiterate Aldi's appreciation for the overwhelming response and levels of support that our proposals have received from the local community. During our pre-application consultation, we received responses from nearly 1,200 residents, 89% of which supported the proposals outright. This support is reflected by the hundreds of supportive representations on the Council's planning file and the online petition, which was organised by local residents, which has generated over 600 signatures. I would therefore respectfully request that you support your officer's recommendation and improve our application. Thank you very much for your time.
That's lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Jones. So we've had our 2 registered speakers. What I like to do now in the process is go to local members. One of which is a member of the planning committee, so would have been able to speak anyway during that, but as has indicated that he wishes to speak as a local member at this time. So first of all, I will call on Councillor Joe Hale, who is the local member, or is one of the local members, and you are not limited to 5 minutes, Councillor, but as you can understand, this committee is going on quite a substantial time now, so I would ask you to be as brief as you can be. So Councillor Joe Hale.
Oh, thanks, Chair. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I just want to apologise for my delay in joining the meeting this morning, you know. But I just want to say I'm not going to say much because I think Steve Ball has covered everything, and you know, Rob Jones. So I just want to say that at the beginning of this application, my first inclination was the traffic congestion. In the process of investigating this issue, I met with Justin Griffiths, our senior highways engineer, who took me through all the conditions that were going to be inserted into the application, and consequently all these have been applied. If you refer to page 51, it's, you know, it's all written there. I've also met with Steve Jenkins, our planning officer, who again took me thoroughly through the application stage by stage, explaining all the conditions in place. I also arranged a site meeting to the area and met with Rob Jones, the property director of Aldi, who again went through the application in great detail, and assured me that all the conditions would be met in full. During one of my conversations with Rob, I asked about the 40+ jobs created within the store to ensure we use local people, also local contractors in the construction of the store. I think Steve's covered. I had other things, but they've all been covered. I just want to say that a Grampian condition is imposed upon the consent, which prevents the start of development until off-site work is completed on the junction, the right-hand turn lane, and the disabilities place. I knocked on every door and spoke to many of the residents, which I must say most welcome the store and, you know, its close amenity. I know there have been objections for the siting of this business, but also there has been a substantial number who welcome the business to the area and the employment it'll bring in these troubling times. On reflection on my investigation into the planning application, and with further knowledge that the officers have done due diligence and set such a high standard of conditions and bring in much needed employment to the area, I can wholeheartedly say, as my role of councillor, in representing my residents, I will be fully committed in making sure that all conditions laid down by the planning department will be strictly adhered to. Once again, Chair, thank you very much for allowing me to speak. Thank you.
You're welcome, Councillor. Next, I'll turn to Councillor Chris Williams, who, as I say, is a member of the Planning Committee, but wants to speak as a local member. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. As an elected County Borough Councillor for Bringor South and a member of the Planning Committee, I would like to submit the following statement. I have visited the proposed redevelopment and I am aware of the area due to being brought up in Neath Abbey and currently reside near this location. I have read the supported documents taking into account the objections to the proposed development as well as the views of the constituents in favour of the development. I would like to commend the detailed report together with the officers and members of the staff of Neath Talbot County Borough Council and the consultants who had an input into this application during these unprecedented times. Also, the applicant has adhered and responded to any concerns recommended or identified. As mentioned previously, if approved, this retail development would create 27 full-time jobs with 40 in total. Also, the applicant is looking to use a local construction company to be involved in this development. As mentioned previously, this has been already written, the site is unused currently with only CSN engineering located on this land who have no objections to this development. Objections have been raised in relation to the noise from 2 refrigeration compounds at the south corner building, and at the south corner building, a low ultra noise gas cooler in the southeast corner would be installed, and a new acoustic fencing 2 meters high and a 2.5 acoustic by at least a Coed and Glenheir, as a 2 meter high fence between the car park and Road and Lodge. Also, it has been identified that there is no unacceptable overbearing or overshadowing issues as a result of this development. The building will be the same height as the CSN building. Access to this site has been a matter of concern. A 7.1 metre wide access road and a 2 metre wide pavement either side of the access has been proposed with no objections from the highway officer. More lights have been installed which are more responsive to traffic conditions, which should address the concern of traffic congestion. Furthermore, within 3 months of the store becoming operational, a noise assessment would be made by the local authority. After reviewing the relevant documents and guidance from officers, as well as the ongoing cooperation of the applicant, I fully support this application, and within my role as County Borough Councillor, I will ensure all the conditions are met if successful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, right. What I'd like to do now is, as Councillor Hunt has brought it up, is go, before we go to questions, go to Mr. Justin Griffiths, who was the Senior Highways Officer, to give his short report, because a lot of mention has been made to the highway. So I'd like to give the officer the opportunity to give his short report now. So Mr. Griffiths, please.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, everyone. I hope you all can hear me. If I may, I would like to explain to members how Highways assessed this application and consequently arrived at a recommendation for highway approval for this application. Back in 2008, the applicant had submitted an application requesting the same proposals. However, Highways recommended refusal for this application on insufficient information submitted for the traffic impact assessment. And in regards to the off-site works, in order to provide an adequate junction, visibility displays, and a suitable right turn lane, the applicant needed to acquire land which was outside of the applicant's control, therefore could not achieve the requirements, and hence the reason why it was refused. I must admit, when I first seen this application before me, I was a little sceptical based upon the previous refusal. But like every planning application submitted to the council, any new information, we have to assess it with the evidence submitted. We've had many meetings, discussions with the consultant, the applicant throughout this process, and it has been very rigorous, believe you me. If we were to focus on the first reason for refusal back in 2008 with regards to insufficient information for the transport impact assessment, a traffic survey was undertaken for this application, which started on the 15th through to the 21st of October 2019 for 7 days and before COVID lockdown. October is classed as a neutral month, as recommended within DMRB, which stands for Design Manual for Roads and Bridges, Volume 13, Section 1, Part 2, and is also stated within the Department of Transport Guidance for Transport Assessments. Okay. The survey undertaken by the applicant was outside the October half term, which commenced shortly thereafter on the 28th through to the 1st of November 2019. And whilst the survey was undertaken, all local schools, including Dura-Vale Comprehensive and shops, etc., Neath College was still open and operational. On completion of the survey, the data was then submitted to the Highways Authority. The consultants had populated the traffic survey data into the traffic impact assessment, together with a committed development proposed in and around the area. So that was factored in as part of the modelling also. The model provided traffic predictions over a 15-year period in accordance with TAN 18, and the forecast of trips would provide results for the highways impact both with and without development over that period of time of 15 years, as previously said. The traffic impact assessment showed a slight increase in capacity and delays, which would be common in any event for a new development and was to be expected. However, the data had shown that traffic trips were below saturation levels within the modelling results. Whilst this data was currently valid and it was suitable to progress, we in Highways were obviously still a little bit concerned, so we then approached the developer and their consultants to undertake a survey on the traffic signals by Dwyrafelin and Neath Abbey Road by the college and the school. However, that task was not undertaken because we were then informed that the Welsh Government had funded a traffic improvement scheme along with the partnership of Neath Talbot to implement a mover system on these signals. Mover is an acronym, an MOVA to be precise, and it means a microprocessor optimized vehicle actuation. It's a system that was commonly used on telematics, i.e. traffic lights, where there are matters of vehicle capacity. This computer software stored into signals, which is constantly thinking 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because it's constantly thinking. We cannot survey the signals of this junction because they can vary. The mover gives a priority to the arm of highways that have the greatest amount of traffic capacity to emit delays. And by implementing, it is said by my traffic telematics engineer, who I spoke to on this project, has said that the benefit of these mover system will improve traffic flows at a signalized junction and subsequent delays by between 20 and 25%. Therefore, the mover system, the valid TIA submission with all the data and the survey data had satisfied highways, and therefore no highway objection was given for that one. If I can, if members, oh yeah, Steve's got it on the screen. I was just about to ask if he can show the actual junction, but he's actually showing it on screen. Thank you for that. Lastly, the matters of off-site works and land ownership. Previously, this was a reason for refusal. However, the developer has since approached the relevant landowners and is confident that the land we need to construct adequate visibility displays, a right turn lane can now be successfully achieved. Looking at the layout, you see the lane widths are increased to 3.2 meters, or 2.5 meters, sorry, 3.25 meters, which is compliant with Design Manual for Roads and Bridges standards. The minimum they can go down to is 2.7. So the developer themselves have actually gone further and increased the width of the actual lanes in order to accommodate flows of traffic much, much more efficiently. The length of the lead-in to the right turn lane also exceeds the usual standard length of 15-20 meters for stacking. And this is now estimated to be around 30 to 35 meters approximately, allowing more room for vehicles to turn into the right turn lane and for other vehicles to pass without any compromise. So again, the developer has gone over and above with regards to the design now that we've got additional land that we can utilize. And furthermore, the junction is also subject to a full road safety audit. The first of the road safety audits have been undertaken, and now we're currently in the process of the second one, which is detailed design. Again, the off-site construction works proposed would seek to mitigate traffic flows and stacking of vehicles. Therefore, again, we offer no highway objection. So collectively, for both of those reasons that we refused previously, the developer has now rigorously come back to us, and also the additional mover system, which obviously the Welsh Government and Neath Talbot Council were jointly involved with that project, has now sought to mitigate, or at least to try and assist and accompany the traffic flows within and around that area. So that on that basis, we offer no highway objection for this application before you today. However, in addition to it, which is not relevant to the overall recommendation, I think we touched upon it during discussions where, we're all working from home these days. It could be due to COVID-19, and it's likely, some are saying, that this is going to be the new normal and that people will actually still continue to work from home, whether it be for 2 days or 3 days a week. And that will go towards the government's initiative to reducing carbon footprints by 2030. And also there will be a slight reduction compared to the assessment that was undertaken in 2019. So that's in addition to the approval, and I just thought it was prudent to mention that. And that's it for me, and thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Griffiths, and stand by in case there are questions coming up later, okay?
Awesome.
Right. I can see Councillor Hunt has indicated, but I do believe you sent in a written question. What I normally do is go to written questions first and then open it back up. So, Councillor Hunt, did you submit a written question?
I did, Chair.
That's
However,
fine.
I have a lot more. Yeah, I have a lot more to say on this application today. With your indulgence, of course.
Okay.
I mean, it's the only application we have in front of
that's
us,
that's
and
right.
it's important that we address all the points in the application. But I'm happy to take your lead if you want to go to the responses to our questions first. But
yeah, I'll come back to you.
I'm
then.
ready
because we do ask members to submit questions in advance because it does aid the flow of the committee. So you did also submit a written question, so you can go first. I think Councillor Wilcock, did you submit a question?
Yes, I did, Chair. I submitted.
So I'll come to you next.
I'll bear with you on that.
I'll come to you next. Councillor Hunt, then, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I thank Mr. Ball first for our long presentation and the Highways Officer for explaining all the and the reports. But Chair, with your permission, we had 2 late amendment sheets. We've been bombarded by 4 those in favour of the application, those against the application. It's not easy being a committee member at this time, but I have relevant points and I apologise in advance that Mr. Ball may have already answered them, but because I've written them out, I would like to still address them if I may.
Go ahead then, Councillor Hunt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The technical advice note 4, TAN 4 as more commonly known, is a retail impact assessment. And this is in line with what I need to say, so I need to read it out, Chair. The tests of retail need are the starting point for planning for new retail development in both development plans and development management. The quantitative needs test is based on forecasting of expenditure, and expenditure is key because I'll be coming on to that in a short while, on a certain type of retail good and comparisons and convenience, for example, over a period of time, which is then assessed against the current level of provision. Any shortfall in the provision is then expressed, of course. The requirement to consider need for a development is not relevant for retail proposal within a defined retail and commercial centre in a development plan. However, it will be required for any application in an edge of centre or out of centre location, which is not in accordance with an adopted development plan. I wanted to mention objective 3 within this TAN 4, improving access to and within retail and commercial centres by all modes of transport, especially walking, cycling and public transport. Now this site, obviously I'll come on to that with my highways questions, but bear in mind, members, the point I'm trying to make there, and you'll understand fully when I get to it. 6.7 planning policy Wales highlights cases where quantitative need may be justified. It is unlikely that any of these aspects on their own could justify new retail development. Rather, a combination of several of these issues could make the case for further provision. These could include proposals which support the objectives and retail strategy of an adopted development plan or the policies in the guideline. This may be where a retail development is linked to a large area of growth which is not currently served by any form of retail development. I would suggest this is not the large area of growth. And again, it refers to a highly accessible by walking, cycling, public transport, and are not contributed to a sustainable reduction in or alleviation of car journeys, traffic congestion, or over-trading. Those are critical measures when I get to the car congestion with my highways questions. Current travel patterns for communities to access existing retail provision may be problematic or result in extended and unreasonable travel time. Well, again, I would say there'll probably be unreasonable travel time to this particular store, which I will make a highlight on soon. 6.8 Planning Policy Wales also advise that regeneration and additional employment benefits are not considered quantitative need factors in retail policy terms, though they may be material consideration in making a decision on a planning application that we are talking about today. If there is no quantitative retail need for a proposal, the net impact on employment may be negligible, as there may not be economic impacts on, there will be economic impacts on existing stores in the area, which again we've referred to as Lidl, Tesco, they mentioned Morrison's, no B&M, and etc., which would require them to reduce staff numbers as a result. A local planning authority would need a fully investigate such cases, taking a holistic approach before considering whether to approve such schemes on that basis. So I wonder if that has been taken into consideration and been carried out, Chair. A survey was done for Welsh Government, town centres and retail dynamics. It was towards a revised retail planning policy for Wales, and it was carried out in 2014 by Genecon. And their findings, which is very interesting indeed, is to show that this is where Mr. Ball made reference to expenditure. And although Swansea City captured the largest share of available expenditure, out of centre retail parks took the next two positions with a market share of 22%. Interestingly enough, Neath Town Centre had 6% of the expenditure share. So links between planning and developments are key. The detrimental and quantitative problems for Neath with such a store and impact is concerning. The report also had concerns expressed of development policies, that decentralization of business activities. Again, it was within the TAN 23 economic development plan, but it deals with the principle of the use of classes, economic role of retailing and town centres, Chair. They did agree that the importance of viewing town centres through a wider lens of economic and community development is widely acknowledged, and planning and policies need to be considered when anything that is detrimental or could cause issues for them should be taken into account. This is another quite important part. Town centre spending has dropped from almost half of total spending to under 40% over the last 10 years. The trend is set to continue by these findings. The impact of a reduction in town centre spending have been felt most in the smaller towns, which Neath, of course, is. And even town centre floor space fell by approximately 14% over the last decade, while centre floor space grew, out of centre grew by 23% over the same period. So TAN 23 is another technical advice note I wanted to refer to, Chair. In 2.13 is a central objective of planning system to steer development to appropriate locations. Therefore, where a proposed development would cause unacceptable environment or social harm. Now, we mentioned possible environmental issues with this particular site. Demand should be steered to an alternative location, unless, of course, the harm is outweighed by the additional benefit of the development, which Mr. Ball may reiterate after I finish to this such. But such alternative locations will not necessarily be the same local authority. The TAN does not override any environment legislation, but it requires they may apply it in a particular site, where I'm referring to this site. Now, the local member, I thank her for her input. She said a lot of the things I was concerned about. Pollution, health risks from cars, engine fumes at peak times, and air quality are key to this application today. And again, when I talk about highways, I will bring that up. But lastly, on the planning side, Chair, 1.25, local planning authorities should recognise market signals and have regard to the need to guide economic development to the most appropriate location, rather than prevent or discourage such development. Again, in 1.2.6 is in line with these principles. There will be instances where the planning system may not provide the land and market in mind, and in them places the market should be looked for elsewhere. Some proposed developments on sites may be resisted by planning authorities, like ours today. For example, they would have unacceptable environment impact, divert, and this is key, divert demand from town centres, which I believe this particular application will be doing, or would go against an agreed spatial strategies. In these circumstances, so far as possible, planning authorities and planning applications are encouraged to look to alternative sites which offer the same or similar advantages. And getting to the end now, Chair, you'll be pleased to know my concerns on the traffic issues and within TAN 23 says they understand and they are directly referring, I understand it's directly referring to business, but it is worth pointing out that traffic jams have been identified as huge polluters, hence why I mentioned it now, because this 2.113 ppw advises our planning system to particularly support low carbon economy. Well, low carbon economy, air pollution is key on this site. This is the bit I'm going off steer on highways. This is where Justin I want to bring in. I've listened to the reports. I'm concerned about the noise levels. And forgive me, Chair, if I'm wrong, but Mr. Ball said something that concerned me. I may be wrong and he can clear that up for me, but he mentioned that noise levels on this particular site prior to this application is already above the levels of acceptance. If that was the case, I would have thought our environmental team should have been dealing with that prior to adding further noise to this site. So the bit I was referring to with the traffic, I know we're in COVID, I know Justin made reference to it, but I use that junction on a daily basis. I have family living in Skewin, and I can assure you prior to this application, that was gridlocked in the rush hours, in the morning and in the evening. There was accidents happening regularly. Nobody's made reference to them. It even went back onto the A465 where accidents also occurred because of the gridlock to this particular junction. And this is before introducing a further development at this location. I'm finishing now, Chair. You'll be pleased to hear, and I know you're ready to cut me off, but for the reasons I've given, and there's a lot of information there, I will certainly not be supporting this proposal of application today for the reasons I have given. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, right. I know you went through a lot of reasons why you personally are not going to be supporting it. I couldn't get, were there specific questions?
But the questions were, they didn't, in my opinion, consider a lot of the information I have given you.
All right.
In the report. I didn't see it. Some of it was, I thank you for that. But as I said, I wrote this report, Chair, prior to Mr. Ball's presentation. So I wasn't able to know what he was going to say prior to my report. So, so I've delivered my report. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I will ask now for Steve to come back. I got TAN 4, TAN 223. I don't know if you picked up any others, Stephen. Could you give me the officer's response?
Right, yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, and thank you, Steve. I mean, what I would say, I mean, you've stated a lot and you've quoted a lot, and I think when you say we haven't considered the info in the report, I mean, what I'd hope that you would all appreciate is that this is a substantial report, and it's incredibly difficult to place everything on all issues and assessments and all parts of different TANs and PPWs within the report, but both from an office perspective, but also from a retail consultant perspective, and particularly the latter, our consultant has got incredible depth of experience and an understanding of Welsh retail policy, and all of the issues you've raised in terms of PPW, all the issues you raised in terms of TAN 4, in terms of the qualitative and quantitative issues, have all formed part of the assessment we've made. Ultimately, we in the report have concluded that there is no quantitative need, but there are qualitative benefits that are sufficient to meet that test. In terms of impact on the town centre, you've talked about your stance about concern about the town centre effectively, and I appreciate that. And the report does go into an assessment of those issues, but again, our consultant is very familiar with the area, has reviewed all of the supporting information from all different parties, and with his own retail experience and assessment, and has concluded that yes, there will be some impact, but not to a demonstrable level sufficient to undermine the health of that town centre to the extent that we should be refusing plan permission on those grounds. Now, I appreciate that you have your concerns, but from my perspective, in terms of the impact side of things you're talking about, I don't feel that we could substantiate an objection on those grounds, because our retail advisor is not, or would not be, supporting that. I think he would find it very difficult to substantiate a refusal at an appeal on retail impact grounds when he is concluding that it is acceptable, that it would not undermine it. I'm not saying I doubt your concerns in any respect, Councillor. Obviously, what I'm saying to you from an office perspective is we have to look at, is it possible to substantiate a reason to refuse on those grounds? My concern is that I don't think we could, because our retail consultant has consistently stated in his expert opinion that this proposal would not unacceptably undermine the health of the town centre. So that's on that point. You talked about the economic benefits side of things, and that they're not party qualitative, and the report makes that quite clear. What it does say is that there will be economic benefits, and that they are matters to be weighed in the planning balance on top of the assessment against policy R3.
Yep.
So that, yes, you're right, there are associated issues that potentially any development could have consequential impact on employment of staff elsewhere, but ultimately we concluded it is generating economic benefits that should be weighed in the planning balance. You've talked about air quality. I didn't cover that off particularly in the report, because it isn't a big issue in this area, and there's been no objection raised at all by our air quality officer. This isn't an air quality management area. There's no known issues in terms of NOx fumes or anything in here that there's in essence an objection on air quality grounds, even though there might be concerns or conjecture that additional traffic might lead to additional fumes. That is not something that could be substantiated on this site or in respect of this development. And I think, that's a really critical point I have to say on air quality. Even though I understand the point you're making, it's locals can feel it might have an impact, but just because something might have an impact and we think it might, you have to substantiate that. And when you've got an air quality officer who's reviewed and raised no objections, it would be very difficult to substantiate a refusal on that ground. And remember, we do have to look at it on individual grounds. So if you wanted to refuse on air quality grounds, you'd have to substantiate that ground at an appeal if it were refused on that ground. In terms of the final thing you said about noise levels and everything, I mean, what the report seeks to identify is the existing noise climate. And Leah from Environmental Health is here, perhaps if more explanation in the generality is required, because she's an Environmental Health Officer. But ultimately what it's trying to say is the noise levels at certain times, etc., are such that the noise rating level of the additional plant and equipment effectively would not add to that impact. It would be consumed within it. In other words, it wouldn't be noticeable because of the existing noise climate. It's not saying it would be adding to it. What it's saying is, as long as there's conditions to have the noise rating level at the set level below the existing background noise levels, that they wouldn't have those additional impacts. So it's just identifies. It's not like introducing new plant and equipment and activities in a countryside location. I know it wouldn't be, but in a location that is very, very quiet, and therefore any additional noise plant would be much more noticeable and potentially have a greater impact. This existing noise climate is such that those impacts would not be perceived to a greater extent, to the extent that it would cause any additional noise or adverse impacts. And that's gone into quite a lot of detail in the report. And as I say, if you other members wanted Leah to comment, she's around to do so. I think that covers off majority of the issues. I mean, it is a complex issue. The report is very, very detailed in reviewing these matters. I completely understand any member having their views, and obviously you've stated that you won't be supporting the application. What I would ask you to do ideally is, perhaps rather than saying that at this stage, is let's see how the remainder of the debate goes, because it's very important, if you're not, to be able to say that you could substantiate those reasons for refusal at an appeal. And as I've said, the matters you've raised, I strongly feel that it would be very difficult for substantiate a refusal on those grounds. Okay. But I hope that's at least answered those questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ball. I can see, Councillor, you want to come back, but I do feel that I will have to press on now.
Justin's got his hand up.
Justin has been waiting to come back on highway reasons for some time now. So, Mr. Griffiths.
Thank you, thank you, Chair. I just want to thank Councillor Steve Hunt for his comments, and also I've been making notes in relation to traffic concerns that he's raised. Well, basically, in regards to the traffic survey that was undertaken, it was undertaken during a neutral month, which was fair and reasonable and within guidelines. And basically, the modelling as a consequence of that traffic data, using the worst case scenario, together with other matters relating to the traffic impact assessment and the detailed design at the entrance, is more than sufficient in terms of traffic, or so let's say highway and pedestrian approval. The other thing you mentioned was obviously the carbon, also the contamination from vehicles as well. I mean, the applicant has quoted in his speech that there will be a number of cars there which will be carbon neutral in terms of electrical charging points, which is looking to seek to bring into the area, there isn't that many, to be fair. And then the final point then you made was accidents. Yes, that wasn't something I had actually mentioned in my report, but I have dealt with this and outside of this planning committee. So forgive me for not mentioning it in the first instance, but within 100 metres either side of the proposed junction, making reference to the accident data within Crash Maps UK, there's approximately 2 slight accidents over the last 5 years. Now, that's not saying that there are accidents wider afield, but immediately in that location, there are just 2 accidents, slight accidents that have occurred, and that's 100 metres in both directions, basically, but not in the immediate location of where this junction is. And like I said, I can't emphasize it enough that the design is over-designed to a degree. They could, use a sort of a watered-down version, dare I say, of this junction, but we've gone all out in order to provide a robust engineering, geometrical design of this junction to accommodate flows of traffic, and we fully supported in Highway DC as a consequence of the data, which evidently, if it can't speak, it can't lie, basically, and we would be very, very we would really struggle to defend this at appeal if it did end up going to appeal. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Griffiths. I'm going to call on now Councillor Woolcock, who also submitted questions in advance. Councillor Woolcock.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I could just bear with me a second for me to.
Of course, yes.
For me to find the questions that I submitted in advance. I've got them ready. Here we are. Yeah. Can I thank the officers for coming back to me, coming back so promptly with the responses to the questions that I asked. The first question I asked was a little bit of confusion in the report regarding the local members. In one part of the report, it suggested that an initial objection was subsequently withdrawn, and then it goes on to say that there were objections from the public and local members. So I'm grateful to Mr. Ball for clarifying that.
All right.
My second question, and I'll be brief on these because I know they've been submitted and I've had the responses. But my second question was to do with the proposal based on the applicant's site being within the defined settlement limits, but not allocated to retail use.
Mm-hmm.
Had a reply on that. The third question was on the would the objectors have a strong case against this proposal based on the development criteria outlined at the top of page 20, which to do linking with the Court of Appeal case. Had a response on that. And then the fourth question, Chair, was if this application is approved by committee, could the objectors challenge that decision, and would their case be strengthened because the application does not meet both the quantitative and qualitative need? I've had the response of that, and Mr. Ball has gone into great detail as well on that this morning, on top of his responses to me. Can I say, Chair, that like Councillor Hunt, I also had some concerns about traffic levels. However, I note the Highways Officer's comments in relation to the technology linked to mover.
Yep.
Therefore, I didn't raise that particular question with the ones that I submitted in advance. Now, I do not agree, however, with the response in the amendment sheet from Mr. Griffiths, where he refers to home working, perhaps reducing volumes of traffic in the future. I, quite frankly, have seen no evidence of that at all whatsoever. And I've spoken to organisations such as APSI, the Association for Public Service Excellence, and if you link all of this in with mental health issues, my experience is the people that I've spoken to, the vast majority of people that I've spoken to, they would prefer to return to work, because that's the only occasion, particularly those living alone, that they get to meet up with people again and have a chat, work together, rather than work off a screen like we're doing now. So I don't particularly accept that. I don't buy that at all. However, the robust case made by highways and planning officers, I believe, Chair, makes it difficult to go against the officer's recommendation. And we've seen Mr. Ball present for over an hour this morning.
Yeah, I know, it's been a long
We've seen the representative from the applicants presenting for a further 5, yet we've only had 5 minutes from somebody who wishes to object. So, you know, there's an imbalance there as well. But I do think that the case presented in front of us today makes it difficult to go against the officer's recommendation. And I'd like to say as well, Chair, in conclusion, that whatever the outcome of today's planning committee, I think it is highly likely that this application will ultimately be decided in another place. Thank you, Chair. I hope those comments are helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcock. Yes, I can see where you're going, but I do take exception is probably a hard use of the words to it not being fair. We in Neath Talbot have developed a method of allowing people to speak publicly at planning committee. As I say, not all councils do that, and we weight it to 1 for and 1 against. The only thing that's happened today is that 2 local members who are entitled to speak on planning issues have wished to do that, and the officers have recommended approval. Well, of course, they're going to present the report in that light. So I'm not sure that we can say it's not balanced. I can see where you're coming with that, but there's nothing else we can do. We've had 1 for, 1 against. Local members have spoken and the officers have given us their recommendation. Apart from that, under the present sort of protocol, I'm not sure what else we could do. So I'll take your comments on board, but I would beg to differ on that one. Mr. Shaw has indicated he wishes to speak, and the Vice Chair and Mr. Griffiths. So they all want to come. So I'll take Mr. Griffiths because I think he came first.
Thank you once again, Chair, and thank you also to Councillor Arwen Woolcock, who was obviously mentioned about the COVID. It was just a general comment, really, because in some places I fully appreciate and understand where he's coming from with regards to mental health and, you know, people and the need for going back to work and being around people, you know, is a valid comment. It was a general comment, really, and it didn't influence the final decision from a highways point of view. It was just in addition to, because a lot of people I'm aware of, you know, will be working from home, whether that will be 2 or 3 days a week, whereas before they never did. So it will have an impact collectively on highway network systems, is what I was referring to, and not the softer, you know, elements to it, or the sensitive elements to it, rather.
Well,
so I fully appreciate that, and I just want to make that. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Vice Chair, Councillor Sean Percy.
I'm not sure if Mr. Shaw wants to come in. He's lowered his hand now. But,
no, I'll go back to Mr. Shaw now. I'll see what he wanted to say.
Yeah. So the only thing I wanted to pick up on was just in relation to Arwen's comment about the objector speaking. I just kind of wanted to emphasise that, you know, aside from that 5 minutes they had, you know, we also did read the report, and in that it outlined the reasons for objection and the officer's response to those objections. So in terms of us looking at this application, we've considered their objections in the report as well, and obviously all sat here, listen to the objectors speak to. So I'm sure all members will take into account what's been said from all sides of this when they're weighing things up and decided to vote.
I thank you for that, Councillor Percy, because yes, it is obvious that we are taking into account the objections in the report and the responses. I forgot to mention that, so I thank you very much for that. Okay, I don't believe any other members sent in questions unless they can tell me otherwise. No, so I'm going to open it out to members of the committee now if they do have any comments or questions. Before I take any names, I would say I'm very welcome Councillor Hunt's indication as to the way he thinks, and he has spoken eloquently to demonstrate why he does think that. If any other member of the committee feel that they might be wanting to vote against officer recommendation, I would urge them to speak and to say to the committee what their reasons are before we come to any sort of voting. It's not really right that you should sit there and think, well, I'm not really happy with this and I'm not going to say anything, but then I'm going to vote against. So if you do feel that you're not happy or have questions, not sure, please indicate. So Councillor Hunt, did you want to come back in?
Yeah, just very briefly, Chair, being as no other member have indicated.
Yeah,
I just want to make it clear as well, when Mr. Ball refers to his retail, wherever they were carrying out this work, a different retail company, as I mentioned, GenCon, carrying out the Welsh Government town centre and retail dynamics, can come to different conclusions. That's the point I was referring to, and some of the issues that was raised in this. And I reiterate, and I know Mr. Ball said no air quality management. I would say if this application is passed today, I would like to see monitoring on this particular site for air quality, because the local member made some excellent points. And as I said, Chair, I don't want to dwell on it. I know if things do go back to normal, I know Mr. Griffiths has said perhaps they might not with COVID, but if they do, that particular area is bumper to bumper, and obviously that's prior to this development. So I know that's going to happen there, so we need to be mindful of air quality and traffic management. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. I do have a few indications. Well, I've got Leah Morgan, who is Environmental Health Officer, and then I've got the councillor on the committee, Councillor Rydian Misen. So I'll go to Leah Morgan first. Would you like to clarify anything, Leah?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There's been a few mentions of air quality, and I just feel I can weigh in on this point and perhaps sort of reassure people a little. We've got some quite clear criteria as to when it's anticipated that an air quality issue or an exceedance of an air quality objective is likely. And there are things to take into account, such as the receptor's location in proximity to the road and the number of traffic movements. Now, the lowest sort of trigger for this type of road would be a road where there are residential properties within 2 meters of the curb and 5,000 vehicles a day movement. I double checked this prior, and I'm informed there's about, even with the predicted additional traffic movements, is likely to be in the region of 1,500, which is significantly below the trigger where we would expect to be a potential air quality problem. So in response to Councillor Hunt's request for monitoring, there is no justification for monitoring here. There is nothing to suggest it would trigger any of the air quality objectives or any health concerns for local residents. Otherwise, we would have been likely to request more information with the application.
Thank you for that, Leah. That's great. Councillor Rydian Maisen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd just like to say a few points as well. I'd like to thank everybody for their reports today, officers and members of the public. And I'd like to congratulate Mrs. Thomas on speaking so eloquently on behalf of her objections and the residents nearby. Yeah. And also congratulate Councillors Hale and Williams for canvassing their residents on finding their opinion of the residents and acting on their behalf. I would just like to say I'd be fully supporting the recommendation. Now, Theodore Roosevelt once said, "About shot a little competition never hurt anyone," really. So that's all I'd like to say. I congratulate everybody for their spoken today.
Thank you, Councillor Maisen. If you just look, yeah, that's fine. Any other member of the committee wish to ask a question? Councillor Keogh, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just an observation. I'm going to say I've listened intently this morning, and both Councillor Woolcock and Hunt make very valid points. But what I will say is that we talk about town centres, but I feel that this pandemic has changed the way we live, the way we are going to live for the future. It's irrevocably damaged. We will never get back to the same we were before. You saw yesterday with big names in London like Topshop, Topman being bought out and everything going online. I'm afraid this is the way it will go. But the thing is, I'm glad pleased to say, is that the supermarkets and the discount retailers are making an absolute fortune at this time, because of the way we shop. But I will be supporting this application at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. Anybody else wishing to ask a question, need anything clarified, or have any doubts in their mind that they haven't sufficiently heard anything at all? Anything like that? No? Okay. What I will say is it has been a very, very complex report for officers to take into account everything, and I know Councillor Hunt went on to quite a few items that he had noticed, but Mr. Ball and the team have had to take into account an enormous amount, as per nearly speaking for an hour just on the report. We do have the officer recommendation of approval. We do have 2 local members who have spoken, and they are in approval of this. I would urge members, if they think they wish to vote against, that they would have to defend that on planning grounds, and speak now if you do feel that way. With that said, I will go to the recommendation on page 66, which is to approve with the conditions, and I believe there are 36. I can't remember now. Conditions. Do I have someone to propose that goes forward? Nobody wishing to propose?
Move that, Chair.
Who's that? Councillor Prothero, thank you very much. Anybody wishing to second that?
I'll second that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Keogh. I would ask now Tammy, as the Democratic Service Officer, to go through the members of the committee and ask each member how they wish to whether it's for the approval of the recommendations, abstain or against. Thank you, Tammy.
That's great. Thank you very much, Chair.
Also, I forgot my protocol, that they have been here for the entire debate.
Okay,
just to confirm that. Lovely.
Yeah, certainly, Chair. So I'll start with yourself, Councillor Paddison. Have you been present for the whole of this meeting, and how do you wish to vote, please?
I have been present for the whole of this meeting, and I wish to vote with the officer recommendation.
Thank you. And then the same questions. So have you been here for the entirety of the meeting, and how do you wish to vote for the following councillors? Councillor Sean Percy.
Yeah, I've been present for the whole debate and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Jones, please.
Yes, Tammy, I've been here for the whole meeting and I'll be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Dennis Keogh.
Thank you, Tammy. I have been present for the entire meeting and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you very much. Councillor Rydian Mason, please.
I can confirm that I've been present for the whole meeting, Tammy, and I will be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Steve Hunt, please.
Yes, Tammy, I've been here for the whole meeting. I'll be voting against the recommendation.
Thanks, Councillor Hunt. And Councillor Aaron Woolcock.
Yes, Chair, I confirm that I've been here for the entire agenda item and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Prothero, please.
Thank you, Tammy. I confirm I've been present for the whole presentation and I will be supporting the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Suzanne Renkers.
I've been here for the entire meeting and I will be voting for the recommendation.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Chris Williams, please.
Thank you, Tammy. I have been present for the whole of the meeting and I am for the application.
Thank you very much. That's all the voting members, Chair, and I can confirm that the recommendation has carried.
Thank you very much. That is now approved. It's been a very long morning, so I do appreciate everybody's time and interest on this, members of the public and press and anybody else who's here. I do not have any urgent items. And therefore, that concludes the business for the Planning Committee today. And thank you all very much for attending. I will now close the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you,
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.